This is the Speaking of Writers podcast. I'm Steve Richards. Today's guest is E. Davis Enloe, whose debut novel, Into the Nightwoods, is a powerful coming-of-age story set deep in the North Carolina Appalachians. The novel follows 12-year-old Boyd, who is sent to spend the summer working on his grandfather's farm after getting into trouble at school. Alongside his best friend Roger, Boyd embarks on a quest to find an abandoned trestle and hidden cave. What begins as an adventure soon becomes a dangerous journey through family conflict, corruption, violence, and survival. Praised by acclaimed author Stewart O'Nan as a, quote, bittersweet Southern coming-age story about friendship, injustice, and how hard it is at any age to do the right thing. Into the Nightwoods explores loyalty, courage, and the difficult choices that define us. E. Davis Enloe earned his MFA in creative writing from Converse College and has had fiction published in numerous respected literary journals. Into the Nightwoods is his first novel. I'm happy to have E. Davis Enloe join me here on the Speaking of Writers podcast. Davis, welcome.
Thank you so much, Steve. It's a joy to speak with you about my characters and to speak to your audience.
Well, it's great to have you here. So what was the original spark that led to Into the Nightwoods?
I think that I wanted to write a novel or tell a story. I would prefer to say it that way. Tell a story about two boys, two 12-year-old boys that were still living in that dreamlike state of innocence that Wordsworth called apparelled in celestial light. So I wanted these two guys to be innocent, two good friends. I wanted it to be pre-sexual, so that it was just simpler in that respect. And I wanted them to be best friends, but to also have to face obstacles. So it was by design that I thrust them into an adult world where they don't have the skills or the insights or the experiences to really navigate that world, and then but also to face obstacles with their relationship with each other. So
Boyd, his journey feels deeply personal and authentic too. When did you first hear his voice as a character?
I wanted to fairly early because I wanted it to be, it's kind of a sad story, but it's not a depressing story. It's filled with hope. So I felt like if I was going to write a story that's driven by circumstances beyond his control, but not to turn too depressing, that kind of thing, then I had to have a point of view, and it's told in first person point of view through Boyd's eyes and experiences, that I needed a character that was strong. So he's kind of irrepressible. He's a bit reckless and defiant. And he gets in trouble at school and home. But I felt like I needed a character that was able to take those somewhat perceived as negative attributes and enlist them into service for the mission that he's on, which is to protect his best friend from an abusive alcoholic father. So I feel good about doing that. So I think I entered into his voice fairly early once I figured out that's what I wanted him to do.
The North Carolina Appalachian setting, you know well, I know well. Living here in Asheville, you're in Greenville, South Carolina, almost feels like another character in this novel. Why was this landscape so important to the story?
I wanted the setting to be as authentic as possible. So I intentionally placed it in an environment that I grew up in. So all the crossroads and the rivers and creeks and the trestle and the grandfather's house and the lumberyard school, and many of the people they are maybe a composite of many of the people I knew, such as the Uncle Monk, who's a kind of a rascally kind of hero. He's very much like my an uncle that I had growing up that was very important to me, but he was also a rascal. But he was brilliant. Worked as a nuclear physicist for Boeing, but he was a rascal. And the same with the grandfather. The grandfather's a very godly man, but he's godly to the point that it's a flaw in that he can only see the good in people and has to be reminded that sometimes you have to confront evil dead on. So all those people and places, aunts, uncles, cousins, I grew up with them, and so I felt like if I could put those experiences, express those experiences in writing, put them on the page, that it would have an authentic feel to it. So.
Boyd and Roger's friendship is the emotional center of the book. What interested you most about exploring that bond?
There used to be there used to be an old joke about how do you start a fire with two sticks, make sure one of them's a match or something like that, some corny joke like that. So I felt like that if I wanted there to be intrigue, surprise, suspense, tension, all those different words for the same thing, that I had to have two characters that were close, but they rubbed up against each other. So I felt like that if I were to put these two boys in difficult situations and have them face obstacles in their own relationship, that it would create tension and interest. And so, but there were times when I kind of wrote the novel into a corner, and then I had to wait till I figured out how am I going to write them out of that corner now, that kind of thing. So.
Boyd is forced to navigate difficult moral decisions here throughout the story. How did you approach writing a young protagonist facing very adult challenges?
That's a good question. That's one I haven't really thought through. I think it. It was necessary to give Boyd a strong sense of right and wrong, but there is a lot of moral ambiguity in the story. In fact, Boyd is very fond of his Uncle Monk, who's a rascal, but he's also someone that Boyd says he wishes he was more like him because he felt good about doing the wrong thing, and things weren't as clear cut for Boyd when it came to making difficult decisions that he was conflicted over. But he had a very strong sense about what's the right way that people should be treated, that kind of thing.
You mentioned Uncle Mock, rascally character. Boyd's grandfather, Grange, is a fascinating character, strict, stubborn, but layered too. Did he evolve as you wrote him?
I think he did. It started out, he was very much like my grandfather. He was a good man, and but a little bit blinded by his own. I would not say spiritualness. It was more blinded by the religious dogma. Even though he's a really good man, and so I think that I think as the story unfolded and the relationship between him and Boyd, and as we learned that he was a good man, but he was driven by right and wrong, but that he was driven by what's right, but sometimes blinded to the wrongs in the world that have to be addressed. That helped create him to be a character that he was complex. It was not as simple as he's just a godly man and believed in the Bible and that kind of thing. He was trying to do the right thing as often and as best as he could. And even when he failed, it wasn't because he didn't want to do the right thing.
Davis, which character was the most difficult to write and why?
Let's see. It might have been the character of Roger because he was very this. And sometimes people ask me this question, and maybe I'll get around to your question this way. People ask me like, how much of this novel was true to my own life. Well, I came out of a dysfunctional family and a father that was physically abusive. And I've dealt with that over the years, but I had to deal with it. So I think that, I think I saw in Roger some of me in being kind of quiet, introverted, a bit maybe overly sensitive, that kind of thing, and that. So it was very difficult to write that character when I knew that even though it's been years since I've dealt with that kind of stuff on a daily basis, it was a challenge to write about that in an honest and truthful way without becoming self-indulgent, without it becoming about me or my past or whatever, that kind of thing. But let Roger be his own character, but let my experiences fuel him, help inform him, I guess is the word.
Was this book a bit cathartic for you?
I think it was in the end. Yes, I didn't start out that way, but it kind of turned out that way. That I realized deep into the story, I realized, oh my God, I'm kind of writing about two different sides of my own life, I guess, and I can certainly be like Boyd, being stubborn and defiant and reckless, but I can also be a lot like Roger, being kind of sensitive and introverted. So it was an interesting experience as I wrote to to realize that this has more to do that this is more than just telling an interesting story. So yes, it was. It was a bit at times very cathartic.
One of the novel's strongest themes is loyalty. How far should we go to protect someone we love? And how did that question shape the story?
Yeah, I wanted these two guys to be bonded to each other, uh, and if uh, if you were to describe this as a love story, I would agree with whoever would say that. But those two boys would have never admitted that they loved each other, and their boys being how they are. But they were intensely loyal to each other, and uh, even when they had trouble within their own relationship, because it was a difficult thing for Boyd to navigate the fact that his best friend Roger, who has been being abused, has trauma bonded with his father. So he's defensive of his father, even as he's being abused by his father. But it's Boyd's loyalty to Roger that allows him to stay committed to the mission of navigating that obstacle to make sure that he that he protects his friend Roger.
Not to give away too much here, the hidden cave, though, becomes both a refuge and a symbol, too. What does that place represent for Boyd?
Yeah, that's another thing. I didn't realize it at the time, but upon reflecting on it, it's a place because you have these two boys. They want to have a great adventure. They want to escape into the woods, and they want to cross this abandoned trestle, and they want to find this somewhat secret cave that when Boyd's uh, father was a young man before they went off to the World War II. They had along with Monk, those two guys had taken a picture in front of that cave. So Boyd was determined, because he was both fond of his father and his Uncle Monk, that he and Roger were going to find that cave, and they were going to take a picture similar to that and put it in his mother's scrapbook alongside the original picture. So it became part of the mission, but it also represents something of a safe place that they were able to escape. Originally, this book was called The Trestle because the title worked in that sense that they were crossing this trestle into a more adult life and leaving the childhood things behind them. But the cave represented a solace, an escape, um, uh, even though they find that night that they're camping there, it's not quite as safe as they thought it was, but just like life. We have these, we want to be safe, we want a stable environment. So this allowed them a place to go to where they escaped all the pressure. They escaped the abusive father. They escaped Grange, even though he was well intended, always watching them and making them stay in line. They escaped that. They escaped school, escaped parents. So it was an escape farm.
You've published award recognized short fiction. What was the biggest adjustment, despite it being longer, moving from shorter works to a full length novel?
Yeah, that was a challenge because I worked with the short story writer Lee K. Abbott, who was one of our nation's best short story writers. I was fortunate to be able to work with him individually, and he would say, that poems are about one or two moments, and short stories are about two or three moments, but novels are about lots of moments, and that you have to keep all that in your in your mind, and you have to make it cohesive. And it's much more difficult to manage time to start with, because that's always a problem in writing. But to manage the pacing and the proportions, much more complex. And then, but I was very fortunate, because I say that I made it a point of seeking out people that were smarter than me, and that wasn't hard to do, and that they would tell me that, oh no, you need much more of Monk here, or what's happened to Roger's story. So those things. So there's a learning curve there that of just learning how to put a novel together, how to put a story together in a way that's cohesive, that flows without dragging too much, and that this thing, I think it was John Gardner said about it, everything in the novel has to contribute towards moving that narrative forward. If it doesn't, it kind of has to go, that kind of thing.
And Davis, in terms of putting the novel together and the structure, did you use an outline, or did you let the story unfold as you were writing it?
I did not use an outline. I used I let it unfold. I wanted to be open to the discovery of it all, and but there were times that I had to stop and think about. I guess this is kind of a form. It's certainly a form of observation. It may be a little like outline, where I had to stop and think. Okay, this story's moving in this direction. Do I want it to go there? How do I get it back on track? Which portions of it, there were large portions of it that had to be cut out because it had nothing to do with. I think the big challenge is to figure out what story wants to be told and which characters have the most interesting story to tell, and to make sure they get placed in the story, and the things that you don't need. And that's the whole thing about he didn't say it first, but Hemingway Faulkner was well known for saying that you have to kill your darlings. So there were things in here that I was really fond of, spent a lot of time on, and thought it was so essential to the story that I realized later, or had pointed out to me, this doesn't belong in this story. So there was that going on.
Did you always know that you were a pretty good storyteller from a young age?
No. I wish I'd known that, but I always knew that I loved stories. When if we would go to church, I always stayed awake to listen to when the preacher's going to get to the story, and that kind of thing. So I think there was always a strong sense of story. Loved it when my mother would read to us, and loved going to the Rutherford County Library and bringing back more books than I could possibly read. And so there was always a fascination with story, but I didn't think too much about could I write a story. And then when I retired from the National Guard, I decided that I wanted to go back to school, and actually my MFA was in poetry, but I was a very narrative poetry. I loved James Dickey poetry and that kind of thing. And then when I worked with Rod Smith, who was the editor of Shenandoah Literary Magazine, he was a very narrative poet, but he was also a short story writer. So it was kind of a natural, worked out very well for me that it was kind of a natural transition from narrative poetry to telling a story. And the biggest thing I had to do once I wanted to learn how to tell a story was learn how to write a scene. That I would go along swimmingly for a while, and then I would fall off into exposition. So I had to learn what Lee K. Abbott would call the stuff that goes into a story, the dialogue and the exposition, and the interior life of characters, as well as the narration, those kind of things. And all of that felt very awkward, unnatural initially, but the more I did it, the more I understood how stories flow. It became much easier.
Appalachian literature has a rich tradition of place-based storytelling. Did you feel a responsibility to contribute to that literary tradition in your debut novel?
Oh yeah, I spent a lot of time reading and rereading Eudora Welty's essay on place, and it was very interesting because Lee K. Abbott had told me one time that you need to stop reading so much Faulkner. Well, the truth was I hadn't read that much Faulkner, so it was kind of. I think I read A Rose for Emily. I gave up on Absalom because I couldn't understand, and. So I think that yeah, I always had an affinity for story and wanted and yeah, I love stories.
As a debut novelist, Davis, what has this publication journey been like for you personally?
Well, that's been an experience. It's been a challenge. In fact, I was talking to someone today about how that the promotion of writing is not the most palatable part, even though I actually love talking on podcasts and to someone that has genuine interest in what you've written. But it's not writing. It's not. It's kind of like what Stewart O'Nan told me when I told him that getting the book published. Said, "Great, get back to writing." That kind of thing. So the whole thing of publication and promotion, it's an essential part of it, because what good is writing if you're not sharing it with people? What good is a great story if you're not sharing it with people? But the publication thing was I was very lucky with Regal House, and they have some great editors, and that they did everything that they said they were going to do. And I think I ended up with a good cover. And so that part's been a challenge. And it's kind of like the thing about it. Everything's hard until you know the answer. So once you go through it one time, you realize, oh, okay, I see how this works now. It's not as scary as I thought it was. So.
And Davis, what is next for you and your writing? Are you working on your sophomore effort?
I am. I've written the first draft of a novel called "Still So Beautiful," and it's more of an adult-themed novel, more so than a coming-of-age story. But I feel like just recently I kind of got sidetracked with getting this one published and getting it promoted and that kind of thing. So now I'm getting back to it. I understand more, I think, now how that story has to flow. So yeah, I'm hard at it. I did just what Stewart O'Nan said. I got back writing. So.
Does it take place in South Carolina or North Carolina?
It takes place in North Carolina, and I may change this, but right now it's in a town called Ellington, which is a fictitious town, but it's on the Nantahala forest on the borderlines, and it's kind of in a town between Asheville and Bryson City.
Yeah,
and I may yet just I'll probably leave it that way, but it's very much Appalachian. But it takes place in modern times.
All right, so another one coming from E. Davis Enloe. The book out now is Into the Nightwoods. It's a compelling and beautifully written coming-of-age novel about friendship, courage, survival, and the difficult choices that shape who we become. Davis, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much. It's been so much fun talking about it.
Thank you. Same here. And thank you for listening and for watching to the Speaking of Writers podcast. You can hear this episode and all of our author interviews on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Steve Richards. Thank you for watching and for listening. I will talk to you again next time.